Joe Hirschberg, who's been the facilitator of our discussions with Opal and Bus Riders United, comes up, just sort of set the stage a little bit, which is, remember that Opal presented us with a proposal for a 3-hour transfer with unlimited transfer after 7 p.m. During our fiscal year 14 budget process. We said, can't deal with that right now, but we'd be happy to work with you over the summer. And there's been some really, I think, terrific conversations, very productive conversations with Opal over the summer. We presented to you at an earlier meeting the actual Eco Northwest initial analysis of the costs of those proposals. Based on all of those work sessions and the input from Opal, that there's a revised proposal, revised cost estimate, which we've also been provided from Eco Northwest. And we're very pleased to have had that conversation, that dialogue that resulted in, I think, very much more reliable numbers, if you will. And I said earlier, you all know Joe Hirschberg from Solid Ground Consulting, and I think he's been instrumental in helping us work through this process. So with that, I'll just turn it over to you.
Thanks. Well, I just want to really briefly frame this, and you've got a memorandum for me that provides a little bit of detail. In July and August, representatives of TriMet, Opal, Bus Riders Unite engaged in an intensive process, 5 meetings, and everybody had homework in between the meetings to understand the importance and the implications of transfer policy for TriMet and low-income riders, especially those who are transit dependent. Dave Auxier and Janelle Bell represented TriMet. Terrence Coleman and Ava Moore represented Bus Riders Unite. And Ben Duncan, who is their board chair, Jared France and Vivian Satterfield, who are staff members, represented Opal. I think you're going to hear from the Opal and BRU folks in a few moments, except for Terrence, but everybody was engaged deeply in this process. Turnaround time was very quick. Thanks to this collaboration, questions and differences regarding the data were thoroughly addressed, and the analysis was really strengthened. And as a result of that, you can address policy issues rather than getting distracted by questions about the sort of technical details. The group focused almost exclusively on transfer policy, but as you discussed just a few moments ago, it's part of a much bigger context, and it was, I think, disappointing to everybody that we didn't sort of roll up our sleeves and hammer out a compromise, but it felt like, because this is part of a much bigger picture, it was much more important for the board to get a clear understanding of transfer policy within that context, and that's what we're here for today. I think finally everybody agreed that in the long term there ought to be an ongoing working relationship between Opal and BRU and TriMet to address a full range of transit equity issues. And once we're through this, this group will get back together and talk about how to make sure that that long-term relationship works effectively and really represents everybody well. I just want to say 2 other things. One is I'm happy to answer your questions now or at any time. I'm providing contact information for you. And the other is that on sort of a personal footnote, that everybody really worked very hard in this process. But one person went way above and beyond. Jared France was taking the bar exam in the middle of this. And every meeting we got to check in with Jared about how he could possibly do that and be so conscientious about all of this as well. He hasn't gotten the results yet, but we're all hoping for him. I think Vivian is going to take the lead here, unless anyone has any questions for me.
No, thank you for helping out.
Yes, thank you. Great. Good morning, Board President, members of the board, General Manager. In 2010, Opal launched Bus Riders Unite, which is a project that really was put together to address the ongoing transit challenges of low-income folks and communities of color in Portland. In February of 2011, they went through a prioritization process in which transfer times was one of 3 priorities that was addressed by members of Bus Riders Unite. The other ones were physical and bus stops, which thankfully we've made a lot of progress on with TriMet staff, and with addressing youth access to transit, which is something you'll be hearing ongoing. It's gaining a lot of traction in the community. So really, after now 3 years of talking about transfer times, and at that time we had over 6,000 signatures from transit riders supporting the idea of extended transfer times, and over 30 endorsing organizations, community-based organizations, who are representing their constituents. The issue is even more relevant now. It's relevant in light of the fare increases that came down in September 2012, which disproportionately impacted bus riders. It's relevant in light of the precedent that has been set for the use of contingency funds by this board, and in light of the innovative ideas that have been launched really nationwide by other transit agencies, which are facing the same challenges that TriMet is as well. So I'm going to keep my comments very short because I'd like to introduce, you're going to hear from Jared Franz, who's our policy associate today, Aiden Moore, who is the chair of our Research and Advisory Committee representing Bus Riders Unite, and Opal's board chair, Ben Duncan. And again, Terrence was not able to be with us today, but he was heavily engaged in this process.
Thanks. I'm going to go first because I want to just address what I think is always right at the front of people's minds, and that's what is the cost of this program. The cost that got developed as a result of the collaborative process that's already been discussed by Joe and Vivian resulted in a cost estimate of about $2.6 million. Now this is the result of a much longer history of attempting to estimate the cost of this program, previous attempts that have been limited by available data, that have made it a challenge for both TriMet and others to estimate the cost of the program. The latest attempts to estimate the cost was no exception. We still have not the data that we would like to have, and some reviews of the initial approach to this analysis resulted in significant changes to the proposal. When this estimate was initially presented to the TriMet board, we used what was called the time until available method. Hopefully everyone remembers that. That approach has been completely eliminated and replaced with what we think is a slight improvement. But it's very important to keep in mind like the relative amount of what $2.6 million really looks like in TriMet's budget. It's only about 0.5% of TriMet's operating revenue, and it's only about 2% of the passenger revenue that they gain. It's also a short-term estimate. We didn't produce a detailed long-term estimate because of how complicated those kinds of estimates can be. But to speak to Member Prosser's point earlier, considerations of long-term impacts are very important. And what we know from the literature is that people's sensitivity to things like price changes are less dramatic in the short term than they are in the long term. And in fact, the values, what we call price elasticity, that are used to calculate ridership growth in the long term are 2 or 3 times larger in the long term than in the short term. So the 2 things that are most important to keep in mind about this relatively small cost is that it's the short-term diminishing cost of this program. We also have reasons to believe that the $2.6 million is still too high for a number of reasons that are detailed in the report that we submitted to you. But to hit them very quickly, there have been recently a reduction in weekend transfer times on the bus as a result of the installation of ticket printers. And the analysis, we feel, did not properly consider those impacts. The campaign for fair transfer would essentially restore the transfer times that previously existed on weekend service, and the cost is we think, essentially negligible as a result on weekends. We also think that it underestimates ridership growth, not just in the long term, but also in the short term. And we think that the day pass estimate is too large. This was a part of the estimate that came down considerably in our work sessions, over $700,000 actually actually was reduced from that cost estimate, and we continue to believe that it's still a little bit too high. Of course, whether or not $2.6 million is a lot of money to TriMet relative to the rest of its budget, there's still a question of how do you afford it, how do you fit it into the budget. And what's nice about such a small relative cost is that no adjustment to the budget is currently necessary. Board policy calls for about $100.7 billion in the cash and contingency fund balance. There's about 18.7 million more than that currently in the balance, and it could easily absorb a potential loss in short-term revenue without making any major adjustments to this year's budget. And if adjustments to next year's budget, when the actual impacts, as opposed to simply predicted or estimated, when those are more clearly known, future minor adjustments are something that Opal would be happy to work with TriMet on in the future. And just one quick final thought about CFT versus bus service relative to cost. I've already pointed out that the cost of CFT is a short-term and diminishing cost, and this is very different from something like increasing service, where you incur fixed long-term costs that tend to increase over time, things like labor, maintenance, other operating costs. So it's very important to keep in mind the real difference between what we're talking about here. Short-term diminishing costs versus fixed long-term and increasing costs when we increase service. We also have vetted this proposal over 3 years versus bus service increases still being part of an ongoing process. And ticket printers would make the introduction of this policy almost instantaneous. It's literally a few strokes of a keyboard away. And finally, the cost relative to restoring bus service is much, much smaller. CFT costs about 1/3 of the cost of restoring our frequent service network, and again, diminishes over time. Of course, the cost of CFT relative to bus service is only one question. We also have to answer the question of what's the impact on riders of extending transfer times versus increasing bus service. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Ava.
Right. It's been clear from previous briefings and our conversations with TriMet that the agency and board is prepared to consider CFT and service restoration as trading off against each other. And Jared just went over the financial reasons that they're two separate questions. They do have separate impacts as well. Because it helps all cash and ticket riders on all routes, CFT has system-wide benefits. So you can add frequency back to selected lines, but that doesn't address other types of problems. You know, if you live and work on a low-frequency line, then even if you have, you know, a connecting bus that runs, you know, a few more minutes, right, early, then if you are also using a line that only comes once an hour, then that increase in service frequency isn't going to benefit you. We're still going to have late buses. CFT addresses this kind of problem. To name just a couple of the lines that aren't targeted for service improvements, consider East Portland's 22 through 25 lines and the chronically late line 71, not targeted for service improvements. Everyone who uses those lines, you know, the suburban west side lines, would benefit from CFT. And second, because a majority of cash and ticket riders are low income, CFT is a targeted form of fare relief. When TriMet created the existing fare mitigation programs, it was out of concern for low-income riders. Unfortunately, these fare mitigation programs that exist aren't enough. There are social service agencies that could be buying discounted tickets, but aren't making full use of the program because, you know, in this economy, they're cash strapped. They don't have the money. So their clients don't get the discount. What CFD does is it meets more of the need that's out there by removing barriers to access. If you can buy a ticket, you can benefit from CFT. And that gets at another important difference between frequency of service and affordability. You can improve the transit system, but there's still an urgent affordability problem. Fares have been jumping past inflation since the 1990s. Low-income people are still living in a recession that started 5 years ago, and their fares have increased steadily most of that time. This double blow to riders can be alleviated through fare relief that reduces the cost burden of riding and expands people's access to transit. As Vivian highlighted at the beginning of this presentation, this isn't a unique problem to TriMet. There are agencies around the country that are facing similar problems, and a few have embraced innovative ideas to solve them. Minneapolis extended its fare to 2.5 hours and grew its ridership. San Francisco created an unlimited nighttime fare to enhance public safety and serve people who work at night. Dallas looked at its Title VI responsibilities and developed a low-cost midday fare. Like Portland, their fare normally is $2.50. They created a 5-hour midday fare that costs $1.75, specifically to serve low-income people who go out and do chores during the day. TriMet has an opportunity now to combine all three of these approaches in the CFT and to become a national leader. It's a win for riders, and it's also a win for TriMet, because it's an innovative solution that will generate a lot of goodwill.
So I'm going to build off what Aiden discussed around kind of the opportunity and potential of the policy and why access is so critical. Excuse me. Yeah. Oh, sorry. So Chair Warner and directors. I'm Ben Duncan. I'm the board chair of Opal Environmental Justice Working. Yeah, you're welcome. I'll just state, I'm not here in my role. I work also with Multnomah County's Health Equity Initiative for the Health Department. I'm not here with that role, but it is the lens that I see a lot of this work through, so I will be talking about some of that. Now, first, we know that transit is integral to both community and physical health and environmental health. I think we heard earlier around some of the environmental goals around climate change. It improves air quality, it increases things like walking, but it also provides access to jobs, education, places of worship, recreation, and health and social services. And as the slide depicts, it's a lifeline, and a critical lifeline to these aspects of life. We also know that because of patterns of gentrification, there's a need for increased affordable mobility as more and more of our low-income communities and communities of color are being pushed further and further from the central core of the city. And when we think about those who are most impacted, one of the critical components of both environmental justice and of equity analysis is that we see and understand how specific communities are particularly impacted by transit decision-making. So TriMet's own data shows that people of color are more likely to depend on transit, particularly buses, and more likely to transfer, use cash or tickets rather than a pass, and also to make short trips. So we know that those folks with limited income who have the fewest transportation options are even more pronounced, because these are folks that represent 60% of all boardings made by people living in low-income households. And while there's not a lot of research related to gender, we do know that women disproportionately use public transportation, are more likely to be caregivers, they're traveling with young children, and rely on transit to access services like daycare or assist family members in accessing those essential health and social services. And finally, we simply know that, again, transit is a lifeline for those who don't have other options. So when we think about young people and seniors and people with disabilities, we know that they both have limited options in terms of their travel, but also are some of the most vulnerable people in our community. So this is kind of a side-by-side slide, really looking at benefits and burdens. And environmental justice and equity both demand that we examine and target investments aimed at those most disparately impacted by our decisions. And we clearly know who those are. Appendix B in Opal's report kind of describes it from the data point, and this slide describes really the burden and the benefit, particular to the fare extension policy. So we know that people of color and low-income riders are disproportionately impacted. We know that they take shorter trips and use cash or ticket. We know these people are disproportionately bus riders. And these riders, many in the former fare system saw the greatest impact. A lot of them were two-zone riders, so they saw the greatest impact from fare increases, 19% compared to 4 to 10% for a lot of the other riders. So they went from $2.10 to $2.50. And we also know that the benefits, and I think both Jared and Avon did a great job of providing the additional support for this, is that extended fares provide targeted relief and benefit to the very communities that both environmental justice and equity demand that we target, and that we identify and that we invest in. So I want to close by first acknowledging what an honor and privilege it is for me to kind of stand here and be granted the authority by our Bus Riders United and by our membership to really stand and speak on behalf of those communities. And acknowledge that many riders couldn't be here today, but know that we'll be here September 25th and they'll be able to speak for themselves. The adage in environmental justice is that we speak for them ourselves. So it is going to be important that our riders are able to come and tell their stories and really support what we've talked about briefly today. I also want to acknowledge and appreciate some of our partners who have sent letters that hopefully folks have seen, Native American Youth and Family Association, Center for Intercultural Organizing, and PCRI, the Portland Community Reinvestment Initiative. So we see that this is a broad equity concern throughout the community and with a lot of supporting partners. And I'll just acknowledge finally, as I close, that this is not a proposal that's developed by the staff at Opal. This is a proposal that comes from riders who know and understand their challenges and know and understand the solutions best, who have worked to prioritize and work to gain support to ensure that a system works for them, that allows their voice to support TriMet in efforts to ensure equity in the system, and again, to be a national leader around ensuring equity in the service delivery. And finally, we all benefit, and I think we agree, when equity guides our process and our decision making. So I'll thank you for this opportunity, and thank you in advance for your support and ongoing partnership with Opal and Bus Riders United. I think we'll take questions.
Yeah, I think we will. So why don't you send tape type right there and might have some others come up too. But there are some questions and comments.
Excuse me, I just have comments. I know this has been an ongoing partnership in working and trying to get toward something that TriMet can support as well as Opal. So what I do appreciate is that this came together and that there was discussions. I don't know what that outcome is, but it looks like it's closer than it has been in the past. One question I do have, I think Jared talked about this. It was, you had mentioned the printers and the printers that we have on our buses now. How long, I was trying to remember how long those, we have been using those, and what's that data in terms of being able to look at the impact of what you call it.
Sure.
So first of all, how long have we had the printers?
We were fully installed
In June. So we have a short period of time of data that we have. But so I'd just like to hear about the impact that we have found.
Sure. I mean, it's really hard to estimate that because we've, as Neil said, we've only had about 2.5, maybe 3 months of data since the weekend transfer times were reduced. Previously, the policy called for 2 hours past the end of the line, which basically ended up with 3-hour or longer transfers on the weekend. And all of the data and ridership behavior that these estimates are modeled on rely on those previous transfer times over the weekend. It's 3 months is simply not enough time to see how ridership behavior and patterns have changed. And so we have to just do what we can to estimate how that impact will change. But from BRU and Opal's perspective, what we're really doing is just restoring transfer times on the weekend to what they previously were. And so we believe the cost on the bus anyway, approaches 0. It's pretty small.
If I could follow up on that.
what is the percentage use of transfers on weekend versus weekdays?
You know what, I have that, but
I don't know. I'm just curious. I don't know.
I think we can get that information.
We may need to follow up on some of that.
I do have it on my computer.
Okay. It's a note for our exam, so.
Yeah.
Well, I want to first start off by again thanking the entire group for the work that you guys have done. This is impressive. I had an opportunity to spend about an hour with both Vivian and Jared last week and kind of review some of this information. So a lot of my questions got answered there. So I'll be brief today. And I actually apologize, but I had to leave here in just a few moments to get to another appointment this morning. So I don't want it to appear that I'm cutting out on your presentation. But I did get a lot of great information. I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this rides number on this document here, the ride characteristics by category, is that new since last week?
Yeah, that was information that we first saw on Friday.
So can you give me a little background on what that is as far as rides? I see 101,580, and how does that work with the information and the data that's above it?
Let me grab, I don't have a copy of that document.
It's okay to say you don't know right now, too.
Sure, so the question is just about what the numbers at the bottom represent?
Correct. I'm assuming that the 101,000 is reflective of the number of rides that day that would coincide with the population that we're looking at above, the poverty, very low income, and low income. That's what my assumption is. I mean, because roughly, I believe we have roughly about 300,000 riders a day.
So that
rides.
That's right. So in terms of rides on frequent service bus routes, is my understanding, if you add that up, that's about 100,000 rides a day. That would be about right, actually.
So then that 100,000 would be the total, not necessarily just the population that's reflected above of the percent low income.
Correct.
Okay. So again, I've had the opportunity to talk with both Jared and Vivian last week. I thank you for the time. And my perspective is that certainly, as we've seen, and I mentioned this last week, the Prosperity Project, that the City of Portland did in conjunction with Work Systems Inc. clearly identified, two major things as impediments to employment, and that's one is transportation, and the other is child care. And certainly, as I look to some of the things that motivate me and I'm passionate about, poverty and prosperity, that transportation, as I sit here, is one of the big motivations of why I accepted this role in this position, and I'm honored to be able to represent my district in this role. So certainly, this speaks to some of the key issues that we're talking about, the disparate effect that it has on low income and the low income populations. And we talk about transit equity and some of those key things there. So when I begin to look through it through that lens, this is great information, this is great insight as we move forward. As I look through it through the lens of looking at the strategic financial plan, that also has a component of it. So where I sit today, and I shared this with both of you last week, where I sit today is really how do we take a look at the great work that you guys have produced, and the insight and some of the work that John L. and his team puts together as far as transit equity, ensure that we're not missing anything on in that regard, along with this strategic financial plan. I can only speak for myself in regards to how I feel as a board member in taking a look at this and wanting to get. I received this last week. I think we received it by email maybe Friday. So we've had an opportunity to start to digest it into the big picture, something that I'm going to require. But with that said, I certainly want to applaud all the work that's been done, and certainly see this as a component of taking a look at how do we make sure that we are delivering transit in a way that meets all the needs of our riders, and it's to a high degree our transit dependent and low income riders, which this is a big necessity to them being able to access jobs, everything that you mentioned in your report. So that's critical. And I've said a lot of things, and I haven't said, the essential concept of, yes, I fully support this. There's going to take a little more, from my perspective, a little more taking a look at the numbers and information, and then also being able to connect with staff, because I had a chance to connect with Opal, and then connect with staff and taking a look at that, some additional information. So I'm willing and I'm committed to do that, and I believe the rest of the board is also, but again, I can only speak for myself in that regard. So that's kind of the next steps in my mind, is making sure that I have an opportunity to take a look at it in the picture of the strategic financial plan, and then also with the light of everything else that we just talked about, and many things that are moving forward. So I'm not sure as a board member, I can commit to a time frame, but certainly committed to taking this information and doing the further work required to see if this is something that we can implement. And with that, I do need to be headed to it. It's always saying that last word to head out the door. But I'm certainly open if you guys have any comments back to me. And certainly, I can certainly wait and listen. But if not, then I will speak to myself.
We'll be in touch.
Excellent.
Yes, I want to echo what Stovall said. Pretty much 100%. And I want to apologize. I just want to explain. A couple times I met here and said I will come up and get involved in Opal. Unfortunately, I've had a very serious family illness, and my time's been restricted. And this isn't. So I have other jobs besides this. But I want to commend you on this too. I can get you some work if you need it. This is tremendous. Very impressive. And quickly, I'll want to get more involved with this. Part of the problem, but there's a lot of lousy jobs out there, but people have to go to work. Unfortunately, slow recession, it's been recession for low-income people for about 30, 40 years, maybe longer. But I'm trying to work on that on other avenues. So, but let's talk after this, please. Thank you.
Comments, I guess I can second what Director Stovall also said. Your goals and objectives are consistent with our goals and objectives on this. I do need to again reiterate that I think we need to look at it in the context of our overall funding package. And a question I have for you folks is some of the other things that communities around the United States are doing also interest me. So the question is, I want to hear you talk about the 3 hour, after 7, but I look at things like the Minneapolis or the Dallas, it seems like there's some other things that might work well also. And I guess the question is, I'm looking at you as Opal and Bus Riders United, are you willing to look at other options, or are you so fixated on this one, this is the only option? I'm going to put you on the spot. You don't have to answer now. You can say you can talk back and talk about it. But I look at other things. I'd like to get the best ideas if we're going to move forward in something like this that actually solve the issues the best for Portland. I'm not saying yours may not be the best, but there's others that you brought to our attention, I think, in your presentation that have interest in it.
I mean, I do have an initial thought on that. Namely that while there are certainly a number of options that could be great to accomplish the same goals as we're trying to accomplish with the CFT, the process of developing and advocating for the CFT has been 3 years so far. One of the reasons that we're still pushing it is that there is an urgent current need for more affordable fares. And I'm a little concerned that if we say, well, let's go back to the drawing board and consider, everything else that other transit agencies are doing, it's going to be at least another 3 years before we can implement anything when we have something that's very low cost and very simple right now on the table.
I appreciate that. It wasn't suggested that we take 3 years to get to understand these, but something a whole lot more expeditious and more timely. But again, to go back, I think I just asked you if you're willing to look at other options, and assuming that whatever option it is would be implemented in the same timeline. So again, I don't want to put you on the spot now. You folks probably haven't talked about it, or if we have.
Well, I mean, I'll just say that we're very active and we're always looking at new solutions.
Good.
But the reason why longer transfer times has been prioritized is because it's what riders are asking for. It's what they've told us that they need right now. And there are a whole host of other strategies that we look into. We have another committee meeting this Saturday, actually. So we're always working hard to find those solutions, but this is one that's available right now, and it works, and it's something that riders want.
I have a comment, a couple of different things. I appreciate the different things that you brought forward in different communities. Just the Minneapolis 2.5 hour fare. Can you talk a little bit more about how did they get to that? I mean, was it something similar that was happening in that community as it's happening here in Portland? Was it 2 hours previous? Can you just give a little more info on that?
Sure, so that change actually happened in the mid-90s. It was a while ago, and it happened while Metro Transit in the Twin Cities area was looking for an effective strategy to boost ridership. They instituted a few other changes at the time, including a small increase in service, but they saw a 9% jump in ridership right after making the change. It's impossible for them to say exactly how much of that was directly a result of longer transfer times, which previously were 2 hours, and I believe possibly even one-way trips. But like TriMet now, Minneapolis Metro Transit now has just an exclusively time-based fare system. Riders, I don't know how planners think about it, but when riders get on, they think, I'm paying $250 for 2 hours. That is how they think of their trip. That's how people in Minneapolis have thought of their trip. It's an exclusively time-based issue. And by giving people longer time to use that same fare, makes shorter trips more attractive, and they saw a huge jump in ridership. We can definitely give you contact information for people in Metro, at Metro Transit. We'd be happy to talk to you more about it.
I'm assuming you have that.
We do.
Yeah.
I was going to ask that. That seemed, that information you were looking for, Bruce, Cheryl.
It's fine, I answered both.
Yeah, Mr. Warner. That should be off-the-shelf information. I imagine that your staff can pick up to expedite all this.
Yeah. I think it would be helpful. There's some things caught my interest, and I think it's worth looking at.
If I could add just really quick, one of the things that Minneapolis found when they extended the transfer times was not only would it make transit more attractive for short trips and directly benefited low-income riders, they found that it also had an overall positive effect on ridership because it resulted in fewer fare confrontations with operators, and it made the system more attractive for visitors. Something I know that Portland area thinks a lot about. And a unique consideration for us as well is what happened to downtown rail ridership in the wake of the elimination of the free rail zone. The 3-hour 250 pass is certain to recover some of that lost ridership downtown.
Right, well, I look forward to some good deliberations as we move forward in the discussion of strategic financial plan, and this is on the list, so it's the decision we made. I know you'd like to have the decision made tomorrow or today, but I think what you're hearing is board, as supportive as we are, we need to make it in the context of our overall financial situation. But you make a very compelling case and a good case. I can oppose that before. So thank you for coming. Very much appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you again. Mr. General Manager, is there anything else that we need to discuss today?
No other business I bring to you. I just would note on this, I just reiterate to you that we share the same goals. The question is one of the best ways to achieve that. So we have to have ongoing conversations with the staff and obviously review about how we proceed.
Yeah. Good. I feel like we're getting a handle on a lot of things. So again, thank you all for your time.
I just want to say something. I guess what I would call the good of the order. I don't know if it's I was approached by Commissioner Novick looking for information on how our organization does wellness, and shared that with him, and I just shared some other stuff with him. He's working with this agency and ATU to look at some healthcare fixes. But anyway, so.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I think that's very constructive effort. They've actually gotten a grant from one of the foundations associated with this and are engaged with the agency.
It wasn't the Esmond Foundation. Robert Wood.
Yes.
Robert H. Wood, yes. Which is smart, which is good.
That is good. All right, thank you. That's
All right.
good. We're going to see you in a couple weeks.